Listening doesn't mean you agree. It's a complete fallacy. Listening means you acknowledge them. Listening means you agree where the overlap is. You also agree where the overlap isn't.
We're welcoming Oscar Trimboli, a global listening expert with a research database of over 35,000 workplace listeners and experience from more than 300 interview conversations. These sort of things can really impact your mission and vision, and I'm not unaware of when that stroke might have occurred.
Stopped writing the book while my dad was in a stroke unit for 6 weeks, rehab for 8 weeks, and then respite care for another 7 weeks.
I'm sure that makes it a lot more difficult for the individual who still wants to be communicating with everybody.
A lot of leaders get frustrated when staff are speaking and they can't fully articulate the problem, the solution, the issue. You get frustrated with them as leaders because you're expecting fully formed, very elegant, very eloquent descriptors of something that's going on. Maybe the first time they've had to say it out aloud.
Welcome to Breaking the Chain, brought to you by Impel Talent. I'm Nathaniel Chapman.
And I'm Nathaniel.
Welcome back to Breaking the Chain. This week I'm super excited because we're welcoming Oscar Trimboli, a global listening expert based out of Sydney, Australia, with a research database of over 35,000 workplace listeners and experience from more than 300 interview conversations, probably way more than that now. His work focuses on understanding how people communicate, what often goes unsaid, and how listeners can listen more and effectively improve team dynamics. He's also the author of How to Listen and host of the Deep Listening podcast, which I had a chance to dig through recently. But Oscar, welcome to the show.
G'day, Nathaniel. Looking forward to listening to your questions today.
I'm thanks for being so patient with us. I'm very happy to have you on the show. And I know we had to move it, and then we've had to move it now to Christmas, and we finally have gotten a chance to sit together. And I really resonated with the topic when we had our first conversation, because I think of just how important this is. And we were just talking before the show started on the power of listening and actually reflecting a little bit more on, are you actually good at it, and are you actually practicing it properly? So in today's episode, we are going to explore how deep listening influences leadership, communication, and team interactions, the common workplace obstacles, the practical implications of listening, and how leaders can foster better collaboration by paying attention to what is said and unsaid. I hope that we'll get to dig into a little bit, scratch the surface, because the book is quite extensive on some of the 5 levels of deep listening, and bring the difference between how people think versus speak, and introduce some simple tools that we hope people can walk away with at the end of the episode and implement in their day-to-day, hopefully start to improve some of those listening and communication challenges. Before we dive into the episode, I just wanted to say I really enjoyed getting into your book. And I understand this might be a personal question to open up the episode, but I noticed at the beginning of your book that you dedicated it to your father. You mentioned lost his ability to speak from a stroke and taught you to listen without words. I just wondered, I know these sort of things can really impact your mission and vision. And obviously I'm not unaware of when that stroke might have occurred, but how did that maybe impact you when it came to the book or your own services or meeting with me today?
Thanks for the question. It happened in the middle of COVID, and I was about 6 months out from submitting the final manuscript to the publisher. So the first way it impacted the book is it stopped. I stopped writing the book while my dad was in a stroke unit for 6 weeks, rehab for 8 weeks, and then respite care for another 7 weeks. And right at the beginning, he had a stroke prior to that, but it was only a minor stroke. And this was a major one. So he lost immediately the use of his left arm, left leg. He wasn't able to control his tongue. And it was a fairly severe stroke by any standards. And what it meant was that he couldn't say the words that he wanted to say because his tongue wouldn't form around them. And I got really good at looking into his eyes and seeing fear and frustration and anxiety. But the biggest thing it taught me was reaching out to a colleague in the Netherlands, Corinne Janssen, who's chief listening officer in a hospital system in the Netherlands. And I said, Corinne, every time a medical practitioner, nurse, speech pathologist comes into the room, they don't address my father. They talk to me. And any hints or pointers? And she said, Oscar, just put your head as close to your dad as possible when they come in. And I noticed from that point on, my dad moved from being a stroke victim, to somebody who was taking responsibility for his recovery. And did he fully recover? No. It's a bit of cognitive capacity that was lost, but he can speak fine now. He can walk okay. And I put that down to getting the medical staff to speak and listen to my dad. Even if they couldn't make sense of the words, they could certainly make sense of his intention. And it kind of became a coded language by the time we got to week 2. I could understand where the inflections were, and it's kind of like if you got a very muffled speaker, there wasn't any range in the voice and things like that. So what he taught me in the dedication at the front of the book was how do you listen to somebody when they've lost the use of speech? And we were able to communicate fine. My job was getting the medical staff to communicate to him, but I know from that point on, when he felt heard, when he felt like he was more than a patient, that he was a human that was on a road to recovery. And last week of January, it happened in October. So last week of January, I took him home. And as I'm driving him home, I said, hey, Dad, is there anything you want to do when you get home? He says, yes, I want to kiss the ground like the Pope when I get home. He says, but I'm worried I won't be able to get up. So maybe we'll do that another time. So he still kept his sense of humor.
Do you know that it was when I was reading it, it hit home because I've had family members that have gone through like really bad levels of dementia and things of that nature. And one of the things that's in some of those cases first to go are ability to speak or articulate. And they've been really intelligent, amazing people that I think the struggle of trying to connect what they're thinking to what they can actually say, you can see that level of frustration. So I know we're going to talk about it later in the episode, but there were things that I picked up from your book that I found really interesting where you think actually the cognitive ability was still there. And that's I think the sad thing with stroke, dementia stuff, but actually it's the ability to articulate those words, which goes. And that hits home because I think you nailed it, nailed on the head. People struggle to want to interact with that individual because it is awkward or it's hard to connect. And I'm sure that makes it a lot more difficult for the individual who still wants to be, communicating with everybody. It's not their fault. So,
and I think there's amazing workplace parallels for leaders. A lot of leaders get frustrated when staff are speaking and they can't fully articulate the problem, the solution, the issue. And you get frustrated with them as leaders because you're expecting fully formed, very elegant, very eloquent descriptors of something that's going on, but it may be the first time they've had to say it out aloud. So as leaders, are you getting frustrated by how they're saying it, or are you trying to notice what they actually mean? And I think this is the parallels with the inability to articulate in a language that, let's call it corporatese, when you're dealing maybe with a frontline staff member in a contact center who's trying to explain this systemic issue around customer complaints and things like that. They might not have the exact, precise, right words the first time. If you take the time, you'll discover them pretty quickly. And as a result, they'll feel seen, heard, and valued, and they'll give extra effort as well. So there's parallels in that story straight back into the workplace. And are you taking the time to put your head next to the employee pillow in my dad's example, or are you just the medical staff who are addressing the other person in the room?
I love that. That's a great parallel. I also really enjoyed, we're going to come back to it because we're only opening things up, but I also loved reading that, and it didn't surprise me considering you're teaching all about deep listening, the amount of participation that took place in your book. So I think there's over 2,500 people that were involved in bringing the book to light, hundreds of webinars. And as I say, I shouldn't be surprised. But there was something in there that I read, and I was digging into it after I kind of had read that chapter. You've cultivated a bit of a community, which is the Deep Listening Ambassadors. Can you tell me a little bit more about that and how that came about?
Yeah, well, they named themselves. So it was interesting. I kept saying to the group, we've got to give ourselves a name. What would the name be? And they'd also say, well, you give us the name, Oscar. And I said, well, that's not very listening. So we ran a couple of polls and we had a couple of people have very creative ideas, but it's the idea that you're an ambassador on behalf of listening in your workplace. You're role modeling what great listening is. You're doing that to further the cause of listening in the workplace. And those ambassadors have done everything from run their own workshops to run their own webinars to inviting me to speak at webinars. They've promoted the books in book clubs. But more importantly, they helped around the research and helping to collect participants for the research. So yeah, without the deep listening ambassador community, the book would be very different. And some people read chapters, some people read chapter outlines, some people read stories, some people helped me with the statistics. So yeah, there's a really awesome, vibrant community of people who are passionate about making an impact with listening in their workplace.
I love that. So let's get into it. I'm interested because I wanted to say that one thing your book does do, which I enjoyed, and no doubt probably your individual coaching as well and the work that you do with your ambassadors. And I felt like it really held up a mirror for reflection. I was joking around with you before we started the episode that I was like, I thought I was pretty good at active listening. But I think as I started to read through it, and I think this is one of the most important things for any leader to do, it made me question my own listening skills. But I suppose that's the beauty of focusing on this as a core skill, right?
Yeah, one of the first pieces of research we did was with about 2,500 people. We asked them on a scale of well below average to well above average. And so that's 5-point scale on that. We said, rate yourself as a listener in your workplace. As 74.9% of people rated themselves either above average or well above average when it comes to listening. We flipped the question around. We just said, when you're speaking, rate a listener in your workplace on that same scale. And 12% of people mark people as above average or well above average. So the data tells us that we think we're 6 times better at listening than what the speaker thinks we are. Because the value of your listening and your listening skills got nothing to do with you. It's the perception of the person or the team or the organization that is trying to communicate with you. So there's a big self-assessment bias when it comes to listening. And those ratios, by the way, play out the same when it comes to driving a car. About 3/4 of people think they're above average car drivers. And when it comes to IQ as well, 3/4 of people think they're well above average or above average when it comes to IQ. So when we started to look at self-assessment bias, we realized, yes, it applies to listening, but it does apply in other domains. And it applies in other domains where you have some basic training to begin with, but we rarely make it a skill, a strategy, or a practice. And that's what the ambassador community and the book and listening quiz is all about, is how do you just get better in the next conversation, not you're going to be a ninja black belt listener in 24 hours. We always say just improve the next conversation and you'll be surprised how you build those listening muscles over time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the self-awareness bias can, like you say, apply to so many different skill sets as a leader. And that's not the purpose of this episode, but I love it being applied to this scenario because in principle, I think that's why those 360s that we do as leaders are so important, because it really gets you an ability to gauge where you sit, where you think you sit versus where people perceive you to sit. But I think there's a quote that I picked up again in the book, but I wanted to explore a bit here, was listening is the willingness to have your mind changed. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the first time I was hit with, I think all of us as leaders probably enter a conversation or a one-to-one where you think you know the answer, right? And and this is with junior people, actually, Oscar, you were mentioning about like letting people articulate and bring things to the surface. And there can be a level of frustration because you want someone to get there a bit sooner rather than later, or you're trying to get someone to learn. I love, I had one of my best early leaders used to say to me, I'd come with a problem and he said, well, how would you fix it? And I used to think he was really lazy. You know what I mean? I was like, well, I think it's this. He's like, yeah, do that. And I realized, at first it was a bit shocked because I was expecting more guidance, but it gave me so much more confidence in what I was doing, what I was delivering. But I guess in my mind, I thought I must have been bringing the right solution. Whereas sometimes I will, want to ask that question to my team and realize they're not fully getting to where they need to be. And as a result, I'm like, am I really listening to have my mind changed? Or am I just listening to then, unless their point exactly matches what I was going to say, am I going to influence that decision? So But when I say that statement to you, when you put it in the book, how does it resonate with you?
I think for whether it's a one-on-one, a group meeting, a town hall, employee engagement, customer satisfaction surveys, if we know roughly what the process is going to be, what the agenda is for the conversation, that's great. No problem. There's always the difference between listening and therapy is that, therapy will go on and on and on for quite a while till you unpack the big thing. In a workplace, you don't have that time. So the shortcut to get a permission slip from the other person, so we'll talk about it in a one-on-one situation and in a group situation, for just giving you a completely different compass setting for the conversation that may open up the possibility for your mind to be changed, is to ask, ideally before the meeting, but you can ask this at the beginning of the meeting and you'll have a little giggle right now because it's the same question I kind of asked earlier on, which is, what will make this a good conversation? So if we ask the other person, like the agenda might be about quality improvement or reducing errors in customer repairs, doesn't matter what it is. We know that, but what will make it a good conversation is very different from the content of the meeting. So what will make it a good conversation is how we have the conversation. The agenda is what we're going to discuss and what the ultimate outcome is. So an example of that might be, don't say what will make it a good conversation for you. Really important distinction here. Mm-hmm. If you say what's going to make it a good conversation for you, you're ignoring the agenda and the outcome. So the other person will get quite selfish and probably get very narrow in them. And they'll say something like, look, I just like to test my ideas with you. Or they might say, I've got 3 ideas and I'd like to evaluate them with you. Or I'm just confused about the definition of success for this particular quality measure or whatever the case may be. All of a sudden, as a leader, you go, their entry point into this conversation is from this compass setting, which may not be my compass setting. And most leaders go into a discussion looking at their phone, seeing how much time they've got till the next meeting and figuring out how quickly can they get out of here. And the other person will feel ignored. They'll feel dismissed. They'll feel fixed if you're trying to solve quickly for them. So that simple question, what will make it a good conversation, will open your mind up and theirs, because it also helps if they get off track in the conversation. So you can elegantly and professionally interrupt and say, hey, Nathaniel, at the beginning of the conversation, you said this would make it a good conversation. Are we on track? And they'll self-correct. Oh, no, sorry, nowhere near that. Whereas if we just follow the agenda, it's difficult to tell someone they're off agenda when they're describing in very, 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 very minute detail the quality problem on production line 3 with the hose pipe and the lack of support from the supplier. So asking the question, what will make this a good conversation, opens your mind up to different possibilities and theirs. And we just want to set up the opportunity that our minds could be changed. Listening doesn't mean you agree. It's a complete fallacy. Listening means you acknowledge them. Listening means you agree where the overlap is, and you also agree where the overlap isn't.
I think the part of positioning it as an open-ended question or a bit more of a broader question allows you to understand exactly where someone's coming from and an ability to not over course correct too early in the meeting. So someone probably had good ideas or something else that could have come up in conversation, but because you've sort of led a bias to what you want to achieve in that meeting, sometimes through a strict agenda, and obviously certain meetings require that sort of practice, but especially in open-ended or creative positioned meetings, I think it can really set people on one track, whereas actually being able to open that meeting with that sort of open-end question. Love that you did it with us before we got started, already coaching me as we get in. And I love that it actually gave me, what, actually, this is where I think the episode could add a lot of value. And actually that bit that we concentrate on the beginning, it was at the back of my head, but better that I could communicate it to you. So either it'll totally spark a new idea or a different perspective, which is what I always love about whether it's in negotiation or coaching or whatever open-ended questions can do, or it helps me communicate to you exactly what I was probably not verbally articulating as to where I want the episode to go.
Yeah.
For you, we talked about the difference between hearing and listening, and I know you do in the book as well, but What do you think the comparison is between the two? Because I think obviously there's a level of the deep listening aspect, which we're going to dive into some of those tools and tips shortly. But I think, is that just maybe the perception that someone is letting you speak rather than really seeking to understand?
Yeah, I think again, when you think about think to understand or listen to understand, a lot of people miss the point. So we're quoting Stephen Covey there. And when you read how he explained it, and the way I would reinforce is it's not your job as the listener to make sense of what they're saying. It's your job to help them explain what they think and what they mean. And when they feel seen, heard, and valued because you understand what they think and mean, your meetings will be shorter and you'll actually get to the core issues much faster. So when it comes to thinking about the difference between hearing and listening, hearing is what you hear, it's what you see, and what you sense. So see with body language, sense with emotions, hear with words. When you listen to what they think and what they mean, they'll feel valued, they'll feel seen, they'll feel heard, and they'll give you discretionary effort. So sometimes it's as simple as, Nathaniel, what do you mean by that? And it's not a question posed to help you understand what they mean. It's for them to actually say it out aloud. Because the speed at which we speak and the speed at which we think, there's a 9 times differential. You think 9 times faster than you can speak. So the likelihood the first time they say something is what they think and what they mean, 14%.
Wow.
Or you could say it another way. You could say 86% of what they think and mean has not been said if you jump in and try and solve or interpret or paraphrase what they said in the first 125, 300 words.
Is that because you think that because they've thought through a lot more than what they're communicating? So you're thinking, actually, this is only giving me a snippet of what is actually behind that statement, which sometimes can be, one of the biggest issues with miscommunication anyway. You're like, actually, there is the nugget that you're looking for. It's just, they've probably thought so quickly that you're only receiving 14% of the completed thought.
Yeah, the parallel I always think about, I don't know if you've ever done this, but I don't recommend you do. It's probably not safe. If you open the lid of a washing machine when it's on wash cycle, it's dirty, it's sudsy, it's agitated, it's doing a lot, but it's not actually progressing. And then there's the rinse cycle. And on the rinse cycle, things get clean. There's forward progress in the wash. And for most humans, speaking out aloud is their rinse cycle. And we don't give them enough rinse cycles. Even on a washing machine, you get 2 rinse cycles, right?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you give a human 2 rinse cycles? So I think with most people, a simple question often could be, how long have you been thinking about this? And they might say, I've been thinking about it for the last 24 hours. They might say, I've been thinking about it for the last week. They may say, I've been thinking about it for a year. Your follow-up question is going to be completely different.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
In all cases, just understanding how long they've been thinking about it helps them to understand where they're at. And it helps them to feel like, this isn't going to be a very predictable conversation because they're caring about how long I've been thinking about it.
I think the same about, though, again, I'm going to deviate a little bit not off topic because it's still on topic, but I talk about like inner office politics, and sometimes someone makes a statement or a comment, and politically it gets talked about a lot in the office, or someone misinterprets that piece of communication, which it might have been taken out of context because someone hasn't really explored further with further, questioning on what someone actually means by that. And as a result, it kind of takes a life of its own in a way and gets shared and gossiped. And all of a sudden, instead of really understanding where that came from, there is a complete persona built about this individual, which can create, I was coaching an individual recently, which that had happened within their team. And you can feel it. You can feel the difference of, well, actually, why don't you seek to understand a little bit more on what came from that comment or the situation, and actually maybe I could have absolved a lot of issues. And actually there was a lot more. And that's why I love what you've said, that 14%. Maybe there was lots that they were thinking about and they just happened to blurt out a partially uncompleted thought. And as a result, it's caused people to give that person a negative connotation.
At Impel Talent, we've worked with thousands of people and teams. And one thing is clear. People don't fail because they lack ambition. They struggle because they don't have a safe, unbiased space to learn, reflect, and grow.
Most people are growing quietly, under pressure, and often alone. And they're asking themselves, how do I lead without losing myself? How do I guide others when I'm still figuring it out? How do I build confidence when everything feels overwhelming?
It's not that they don't care. It's that traditional leadership development isn't connected to real life. Leaders don't need more checklists. They need space to pause, think, and make sense of their experiences. Because when people feel supported and understood, clarity grows, confidence builds, and they show up more grounded and intentional.
And that's why we built Impel Connect, a space for real leadership growth, real support, and real human connection. A platform that brings coaching, community, and development into one accessible place. Because growth shouldn't be exclusive. It should be available to anyone ready to invest in themselves.
So what are you waiting for? Join us at app.impeltalent.com. Webinars, workshops, coaching, and most importantly, community.
Impel Connect, genuine human connection in your pocket.
And for leaders listening, this means that the weight of your words are much more of an impact than what you would ever think. So be careful, particularly with change initiatives, that all leaders are responsible for some way go bright, sunny side of the rainbow future inside our organization. It's going to be wonderful. Yet, have you taken the time to acknowledge the past? Would too many leaders listen for the future and forget to listen for the past? And when you ignore the past in your communication, in that example you might talk about there where they got taken out of context, without acknowledging the past, you're going to have very significant inertia or gravitational pull back from a significant set of the people in the change initiative because they feel like they haven't been heard and acknowledged for the work they've done in the past to set up this platform for the future. So I always say, if you're going to talk about the future, you have to have a funeral before you do the future. And not enough leaders on change initiatives have funerals where you burn and bury what you don't want to take forward because it's not part of the future vision, and acknowledge what's great from the past that we are going to bring forward as well. If you talk about future, and I'm a person who's details orientated in today or yesterday, I'm very unlikely to listen. So one of the hints for leaders out there, are you calibrating the way you talk about time in your metaphors, in your change stories, in a way that's going to pick up everyone in the organization? Or are you possessing an unconscious bias by exclusively talking about the future that you're only going to appeal to a very small subset of your workforce? And a year down the track, you're going to scratch your head and wonder, why is this so hard? Why aren't they coming along on the journey?
Yeah.
Haven't had a funeral.
Yeah, I think that's it. There's an interesting piece to when you see organizations go through large transformational change. And a lot of we talk around how companies can do that, whether they're reestablishing their vision or their mission, or whether it's a merger or an acquisition. And I think one of the biggest things that people miss out on is the ability to listen to the people in the organization. We talk around internally about running a lot of workshops. When we did, and we're a very small company, but we reestablished our purpose statement. We started with a set of values that me and my co-founder hired for and believed in, and we had a purpose statement. We didn't have a mission statement yet. I think it's very difficult when you're a small company to say, we're going to be the best we're going to be number one, and this is, these are the goals. We wanted to grow as a business and let our team and employees decide what the mission would be when we got to that stage. But we did that exercise with everybody. So we had our two offices in South Africa and the UK, and spent, a half day doing strength SWOT analysis and different exercises, which allowed people, not saying, what do you think our mission should be? Because you put people on the spot and all of a sudden you're getting all sorts of stuff that's, for nothing, but we're getting a lot of things that don't align. But when you can ask them things on, what do you think we're very good at? What do you think we could improve? What are opportunities? How do you feel when you're in the business? Asking a lot of these more open-ended questions, letting the team also facilitate that. Myself and my co-founder sat in the corner and didn't say a word and let different people, chair the meeting and just listened. And I've had this conversation with a lot of companies that we've coached or done transformational programs with. They say, what would be the best way for us to implement this? I say, if you've got the time and effort, involve the people that have been with you on the journey in the conversation, and don't and those workshops, I appreciate it's expensive, it's time intensive, but when you go through any sort of transformation, merger, values, vision, not everybody's going to be along for the ride unless they feel like they've been included in the process. It's like trying to say to someone, congratulations, your values are this. We worked with an automotive company that had never set their values, and then they'd grown so quickly, and then all of a sudden the leadership established what the values were, and we were doing a coaching program with them at the time, and we both said to leadership, it's amazing, but you're going to lose people this way, because you can't tell someone what their values are, right? They joined for this product, they've helped you launch this product, that's what they joined for, the excitement around the innovation. Now you're trying to tell them you believe in this, this, and this. It's not a marketing exercise. These are deep-rooted values in the individual. What we would have suggested is actually do the round tables, listen, let them explain to you what they think the values of the company are based on the work they've done for the last 5 years. And yes, at the end of the day, it comes down to you to establish those values, but the difference is so massive. And I think, as you were mentioning there, these are the bits that are overlooked. It's just people getting a chance to vocalize and feel listened to and feel heard, and actually being able to take that information and build it into your strategy moving forward just has massive impact. So there is a level of, I said to people through transformation, there's a level of people needing to feel that sense of belonging and trust and inclusion in those massive changes. But also, I think you'll be surprised at what might come from those conversations that you may not have thought about, or, and they start with a lot of those open discussion points and topics.
And a lot of employees answer these regular annual, semi-annual pulse employee engagement surveys with standardized questions and tools, and they have no input into the questions and possibly don't even understand the questions. So one of the builds on that, Nathaniel, is to get employees involved in designing their own employee engagement questions, which means A, they understand it, B, they have buy-in to it, and C, they're very committed to the change. But when you're running all these standardized tools that compare you across industry and profession and percentile bands and all of that, if you're truly listening, the questions that are created by the staff as well, in a similar process to the one you've described around defining mission statements, defining organizational values. I always caution people with, please bear in mind, these are organizational values. People will bring their own personal values into the organization, and then they will make a decision whether they're aligned or not. But please don't tell them they're the employees' values, because they're not. They're the organization's values.
Absolutely. Let's dig into a little bit on some of the tools that you've implemented. And I know we talked around the 5 levels of deep listening, and you've talked about it. Can you give us maybe an overview of these levels and how deeper listening can impact clarity and collaboration as a whole?
And so the 5 levels are: level 1, listen to yourself. This is the 62% of people don't do this at all. They just rush into the next meeting and they've got a whole bunch of browser tabs open in their own mind, so they don't have enough memory to be present to listen to themselves, let alone the other person. Level 2 is listening to the content. So that's what you see, what you hear, and what you sense. At level 3, we move from listening to things to listening for things. So we listen for context, how somebody says it. At level 4, we're listening for what's unsaid, meaning what's that 86% that they haven't mentioned. And then finally, at level 5, we're listening for what it means for them, their meaning. So from 3, 4, and 5, you're listening for things. And at level 1 and 2, you're listening to things. Our database shows us that 92% of people orientated in their listening around level 1 and level 2. It's a very, very, very small group of people who are listening consistently at level 1, 2, and 3, and even fewer as we move higher up the scale. Yet the impact on that is quite substantial. A simple example, we were running a workshop for a pharmaceutical company. They had a sterile manufacturing site, and they were getting impurities in the production system, so in the hoses and in the pipes. And I was brought in, and we had 90 people managers on this site. They were responsible from everything from finance to quality to production. And it was a very inconsistent problem. Some months they'd have no errors in the batches, and every batch costs $1 million. So the consequences of not listening here are quite substantial. And it was really simple because I just got to the front of the room and there was a 6 Sigma fish diagram. It's all been done, diagnosed to death, and they couldn't still solve it. So I got brought in and I just said, with the person next to you, I want you to have a 5-minute chat about who aren't we listening to? Okay, so this is listening for the unsaid at a systemic level. Who aren't we listening to on this problem? And they could vote with electronic voting, so that would come up on the screen so everyone would see their responses. And the most consistent and highest response was, we're not listening to production line workers. So they had chemical engineers with PhDs and masters in chemistry all doing analysis of this sterile manufacturing, but nobody had actually talked to the frontline staff. So I said, look, we can do all the jawboning and talking we want in here, but I want to throw out a challenge. Without impacting production, how many frontline workers can you listen to in the next 2 hours and come back in the room? And that's what they went away and did. They came back, and the head of production came to me very sheepishly and said, we've actually figured out what the issue is. So a frontline worker had put in a defect notice on a pipe about 9 months earlier and was completely ignored. And when they brought it up on the daily control meetings, they said they haven't got time to fix it. They'll do it in the next planned maintenance. And it was consistently ignored. And the person was 62 years old and worked in the production system for a long time. So he could ironically listen to the pipes and would know whether there was rust buildup in those pipes or not. And it was flecks of rust that were getting into the production system. So by lunchtime, they'd spent months, nearly 4 months, trying to solve this. By lunchtime, 2 hours, by asking a simple question, who aren't we listening to? Go and talk to them. They had figured out the root cause. They had scheduled when the planned maintenance, and the pipe was $22. And it had cost them up until that point $13 million in batches that needed to be destroyed. So this is a consequence when you don't listen to the frontline staff. And I don't think there was a deliberate intention not to listen. I think the intention was, that's not making sense to me. And how do I put that on my 6 Sigma defect intergalactic wishbone diagram? And they're not saying it in a way that kind of makes sense to me in my fancy pants chemical engineer language.
Yeah.
If they just would have listened, because the operator just did something really simple. He got a screwdriver and tapped a sound pipe, a pipe that was not rusted. He said, listen to this sound. And then he went to another pipe. He said, listen to this sound. And they were 2 perfectly formed pipes, no problem. Now he said, listen to this pipe. Can you notice the difference? And they went, oh, yeah, there's a marginal difference in the sound. But this production line worker could tell just by the sound where the issue was coming from. Now, that part of it's not about listening, but it is. But who are you ignoring as a leader, as a CEO in your organization? And a lot of times we ignore the naysayers, the negative people. And the reason they're negative is at least they're speaking up. At least they care enough to speak up. It's when people don't speak up that you really should worry. So when you're thinking about your processes, how deliberate are you about speaking to the people who aren't saluting the corporate flag every day and do have a different perspective? And it may not be negative from their perspective, it just may be realistic.
But I think certain assumptions were made in that scenario that happen in day-to-day work at various different companies where someone goes, well, I know better, or I've got the experience, say the chemistry or the PhD, and actually someone's getting overlooked but has identified a solution but has been outweighed. And I felt the same. There's a exercise my university used to do for, actually it was how I got into my first supply chain job, which was bringing in bunches of students, masters and bachelors in supply chain management. Just had you walk through the facility and ask questions, which would appear quite dumb questions to someone who's in the politics, right? So someone doesn't want to ask, like, why do you do this? Or why does that happen this way? Or it's just the way it's always been done. And I think those sort of things, it's interesting because like they continue to do the program because they have significantly gotten great ideas to take to the board and I'm sure get people promoted based on interns and school projects. But there is a certain level of humility to say, we don't know everything. And actually, I am interested, and that's what you were saying, the hearing, which we're circling back to the beginning of the episode, the hearing versus listening, and actually going, I'm willing to really believe that what I'm doing is not right, and that I need help, and that I could use somebody who has years and years of experience of being on the shop floor and actually taking that opinion on board and recognizing it. And it could have saved the organization, 13 million plus. Let me ask you this, are there tools and techniques that people could put in place? We always like to talk about what people can walk away from with this episode. We've talked through a lot of topics. I've really enjoyed the journey we've been on throughout the episode. But what's something that if you were a leader listening to this episode today, what's one thing that someone could walk away with today to implement as a tool or a technique for either better listening or something they could implement in their meeting Monday morning next week and their wrap-up meeting on Friday?
Yeah. Our database tells us that the more senior you are as a leader, the more likely you are to interrupt when it comes to listening. 2.5 times more from the age of 20 to 29 to the age of 50 to 59. And I would invite you to think about this. If you're about to ask a question, whether that's in a one-on-one or in a group setting, stop and write the question down. And you can type it if you've got a digital device or use a stylus. But write the question down before you ask it. So that's tip number 1. That's going to slow you down long enough to listen to the next 125 words. Tip number 2, check the question and ask yourself this: is this question for my understanding, or is this to progress the purpose of the conversation? They're very different things. So if it's to progress the conversation, continue on. And if it's not, rephrase your question so it's a question to progress the conversation. So number 1, write it down. Number 2, is it about you or is it about the outcome? And then number 3, is it 8 words or less? Because if it's not 8 words or less, it's more than likely you trying to guide the witness with a statement and a question mark at the end of it. 8 words or less are more likely to be systemic, aligned to the outcome of the meeting, and more likely to transform your thinking and theirs rather than necessarily the content of the conversation. So if you're a leader listening, number 1, write the question down. Number 2, is it about you or is it about the outcome? And number 3, if it's 8 words or more, stop and you're going to have to rephrase that question. If it's 8 words or less, great, go ahead and ask that question. For most leaders, they treat questions as an interrogation and they can't wait for the person to draw breath so they can load another bullet into their question gun and fire away. I've seen way too many leaders do that. It drives down trust. It debilitates junior and unfamiliar employees from different departments, and it doesn't do your leadership brand any good at all. You may feel it's your job to be an expert. That's not your job. Your job is to help the organization progress towards its KPIs and its outcomes, and that cannot be done alone with you as the expert.
Love all those takeaways. I was just thinking about how long it's taken me to ask you a question on this podcast. I was like, oh, I definitely haven't done it in 8 words. Yeah, look, the closing takeaways for this episode, and you heard it here from Oscar, I think, look, deep listening improves team collaboration. Try and utilize the tools that Oscar has shared today and really take some time to self-reflect on your own communication style and your own the ability for you to ask questions and move conversations forward. I would recommend, I don't usually do too much promotion on a podcast, but I would say definitely worth picking up and how to listen. I've really enjoyed it. So far, I'm about halfway through the book. And I think the biggest thing, and I said it when Oscar came on the show, is it just gave me a perception of rethinking how I'm asking questions and how I'm engaging with my own team. And there are some simple tools that you can do to make meetings more engaging and effective. At the end of the day, balancing communication styles strengthens teams. And Oscar said it at the beginning, but a lot of this, I love the statement you said, it's about progressing the conversation forward. When I hear that, it means that you're in this together, right? And those interrogation-based questions can feel like it's polarizing. You're on one side or the other. I need information. You've done this wrong, as opposed to how do we move forward together? How do we progress this conversation forward? So look, if you're interested, Oscar, how can someone get in touch with you if they want to learn more?
Oh, please don't get in touch with me. Get in touch with your own listening. Visit listeningquiz.com. You can take the 20-question assessment. You'll get a 5-page report that tell you your primary and secondary listening barriers And more importantly, we have got a tailored response based on your answers about 3 simple things to do about that. So listeningquiz.com. And if you really want to get in touch with me, at the bottom of the report, you'll have all the coordinates to get in touch with me there as well.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Oscar. I'm glad we finally got this in the diary. I hopefully will find some ways for us to collaborate in future. We seem very well aligned on a lot of key topics, and I've learned so much just from coming to this episode, and I know a lot of our listeners will have as well. So thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for listening.
And if you're interested, guys, please don't hesitate to email us at info@impeltalent.com. If you have questions or you're a guest, you can follow us on all the major podcast platforms, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us for our latest episode of Breaking the Chain. If you'd like to see more episodes, you can check us out online at www.impeltalent.com/podcast. And if you'd like to perhaps put a question into us or be featured on one of our next episodes, you can email us at info@impeltalent.com. Thank you for tuning in and see you next week.